got squeaky shoes.
Well, good morning, Kieron. Kevin, thank you for joining us today. Really, really pleased to have you here. Want us to touch on a topic that's quite hot in the industry at the moment. Probably a topic that lots of our partners at Exertis Cybersecurity are talking about as well. Not sure they totally get the direction that they need to go in, but we talk a lot around perimeter security and what's coming next with sort of proactive and adaptive cybersecurity. One of the topics that I really want us to hone in on today is zero trust and microsegmentation. So probably going to fire the question off to you first, Kieron, if you don't mind. Can you just give our viewers a sense of what zero trust security is and maybe how microsegmentation works as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, zero trust, my least favourite methodology in all of cybersecurity, right? It's not new, I would say, particularly, but I think people are very misinformed by what it means. So it's a good question. For me, it's as simple as three things. So number one is blast radius, and that is a particular area that microsegmentation really helps in. So if you have a threat or a threat actor within your network, wherever that may be, you want to contain or limit them, the damage that they can actually do. So that's one thing. The other thing is verification. So continuously verifying is something that people would associate with zero trust quite a lot. And you can verify identities in loads of different ways. Where are they? Who are they? What's their access levels? What sort of asset are they using? What time did they log in? All those sorts of things. And the last thing is continuously enforce. So continuously enforcing is end-to-end encryption, right access to the right things at the right time. So just in time and just enough access. That is how, in a nutshell, I would say that I would describe zero trust just in three pillars, as simple as that. Microsegmentation really helps in that blast radius, but it also has connotations to those other two pillars as well by limiting what access users or identities, as we should probably say in zero trust, have based on applications and the types of things they're accessing rather than linear network type rules. That's probably how I would sum it up.
Brilliant, thanks. Kevin, anything to add to that as well?
Yeah, I think we take a traditional approach of allowing everything in terms of networks internally in most cases. That's the historical way of working. We really want to change that paradigm and change that to be a kind of an assumed breach. Never trust and always verify. That's kind of the typical things we want to be aiming for here. We assume typically that traffic internally is allowed to move around inside a given network segment. But actually, that's not always a good thing to have. Not necessarily because it's malicious, but quite often because it's unwanted. It may be unauthorized, and it's unnecessary for business. So if we can just change that to be a more explicit approach and assume that we've got things moving around that we don't want from whatever source and lock that down, it gives us a better posture for our security at whole.
And I think that's right. We're seeing a lot of supply chain attacks. We're seeing lots of data breaches at the moment. Criminals getting in and moving laterally around the network as well. Do you think it's supply chain attacks and these sort of nefarious attacks on businesses that is fueling the push to microsegmentation? Or
I think it's multiple things. I think that might be one of them, but I think what we've got to understand is not every business in the world is going to be threat-led. Some are going to be compliance-led. I think a lot are going to be compliance-led and regulated, so that plays a factor. And I think the other factor is how infrastructure is changing. So networks are getting smaller, by and large. So a traditional network is kind of ceasing to exist. A lot of customers, organizations, businesses around the world that we see are adopting what you would call a Starbucks or a Costa. There are other coffee chains available, cafe style model, in which the traditional network controls that you would put in place for macro segmentation, like firewalls, you can't put them in place. Not to mention, I think there's other drivers as well. Some people might think this is a bit tenuous, but sustainability is an interesting driver. So deploying less kit, less impact on your supply chain, less power output, operational overhead of actually operating devices, and in which a lot of things are moving to agents. Agents and some agentless. I know that's another question, like, do we have too many agents on endpoints? But the real fact of the matter is there's a lot less operational overhead to actually maintaining those, but rather than a firewall and even a virtual firewall, there's quite a lot of operational overhead in that as well. You need like a solid team with solid skill sets to do that. It also means project level work and things like that is traditionally quite difficult. And if you think about how you would change or have business change for a project, and you implement, I don't know, a new application, the application team then has to build the infrastructure around that, talk to infrastructure guys to do that, the storage, the compute, all of that, the cloud, and then the network team have to then go and configure all the firewall rules and think about that and set that up. That's a very old school waterfall linear method of doing things. With things like microsegmentation, you can adapt that. So this basically, it's all templated. I have it ready to go. It's less operational overhead, less impact on projects. They can be done quicker. It mirrors the type of thing that you're trying to do with your business in terms of anyone can work from anywhere at any time, but securely. Yeah, loads of things, basically.
And it seems a very clouded market at the moment, sort of that particular segment of cybersecurity. There's lots of shows that we go to. There's lots of conversations that we have with partners. You mention the word zero trust and they go, I'm already doing it. And, I'm sure us three share the same sort of thought process around that. There's lots of vendors out there that claim to be doing zero trust security. But actually, when you lift the lid a little bit and you look at what they're actually doing from a technology standpoint, it's either very loosely zero trust, or it's kind of ish there from a NIST framework perspective. So probably one for you, Kevin, to sort of elaborate on a little bit. Do you believe that the vendors out there today are doing true zero trust, or?
I think you're right. There's a lot of historical legacy vendors, if you want to call them that, who are trying to update themselves, and fair play. That's necessary. We've seen that a lot of technologies out there. I'm not going to name specifics, but a lot of the three-letter acronyms out there, they've been deployed for 20, 30 years in some guise. And yet breaches are happening, as you say, daily. Yeah. We're seeing that event happen daily. The alternative approach here is what we need. It is the zero trust approach. Are those vendors suitable to that approach? Maybe, maybe not. They still build out part of that. Least privilege is what we're really talking about here, fundamentally, but still tying that into that continuous checking, as Kieron was mentioning. I think if we can take an approach that we're underpinning those solutions, not looking to rip and replace necessarily, but we underpin some of the firewalls, the EDR, the IDS, and all those other acronym types, we can actually help bring some of those vendors into the zero trust fold and help them do a better job of what they do. Are they zero trust vendors themselves? I think they're making progress. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of those are making progress. So I wouldn't say it's one or the other, but I think there's a new breed of explicitly positive security model vendors like Microsegmentation, like ColorTokens, that are doing exactly that.
Mm. And I think it's interesting. We talk around a lot of our partners. They're predominantly small to medium business. And we have some which are naturally working in enterprise, such as yourself, Kieron, and Softcat. How are some of our partners best placed to embrace this type of technology and journey, that not only do they need to go on themselves in order to make their own security posture more resilient, but actually to make the security posture of their customers more resilient as well?
Yeah, interesting question. I don't think there's a vendor that does it. I don't think we do zero trust with a vendor or with vendors. I think we basically make zero trust what it is with how we apply it to our businesses. And that's going to be really easy for some businesses. It's going to be really difficult for other businesses and organizations as well. I don't think it's necessary that everyone has to do it either, because it does not work for some businesses and organizations. If you're going to go by the rule book, which is the standard of zero trust, then not everyone's going to be able to comply to that standard. It's like saying everyone in the world should be ISO 27001.
Yeah.
When some businesses are never going to be ISO 27001 as an example, right? I think you're going to do what makes sense for your business in terms of actually operating as an e-commerce or as a manufacturing company or in the NHS or the DVLA. You know, it's going to depend. Like, some of those businesses are going to find it, you know, particularly easy to do continuous verification. Most people are adopting elements of those pillars of zero trust, right? So they will say, we do MFA. We do MFA for all internal and external apps. That is a method of doing continuous verification. And then you can take that a step further by doing risk-based authentication for your continuous verification. And that's a pillar of zero trust. But they may find it difficult to implement other methods of those things, such as blast radius or containment, because of the types of networks that they offer and the fact that they're still all office-based. And they may find that easier and more cost-effective to do that with a macro segmentation model and firewalls and stuff. And that's okay. I generally think it's best fit. It's best fit. I'm not saying we should do it for everyone. I'm not saying everyone should do it. And it's also not a guaranteed kind of token that you're not going to get breached either, because it's all about recoverability and resilience, right? It builds resilience, but because of the methodology that insinuates, hey, look, if someone does get in, let's just limit the impact of what the damage is. But again, doing zero trust by itself is not being resilient. Like, there's a lot of things that come into it, of course. But yeah, fundamentally, it wouldn't exist as in this publication if it wasn't helpful. Let's just say that. And it is very advantageous to a lot of businesses and very applicable to them as well.
Yeah, and I think coming on to you, Kevin, as well, one of the things that you've made sort of very prevalent when we've always discussed the ColorTokens solution with partners and shown them the console and the system and the operational efficiency that it brings, you always hang on the amount of visibility that's available as well, which I think is probably a really key point to mention around Microseg.
So I think, coming off of that, I think the visibility is really important. You mentioned that, right? And the NIST framework, we highlight that as an example. Stage 1, get your identity sorted. Fundamentally, you want it to be user and role-based, authenticated, controlled access, even internally. And that same access should be controlled based on user and privileges from an external perspective as well. So trying to tie in zero trust network access into that internal access as well. So the same commonality. Come back to visibility, I think that's an absolutely fundamental step. Step 2 of that NIST framework is that visibility of all network traffic. It's difficult to build policy on any technology, not just microsegmentation. I would ask customers today and partners today, how are you building policy on your existing technologies without a good understanding of the traffic flows in the estate? And when I ask customers today, potential organisations that we talk to, almost zero will tell me they've got a good dynamic map of that estate today across hybrid cloud, across containers, across on-prem, across workstations coming from remote. So I think getting that visibility on day one, again, to Kieron's point, whether it's through agents or agentless, that's covering the IoT and the OT and things like that as well, we need that map. You may not manage it in that way moving forward. You may want to do it through an API, as many do. But understanding what you're going to build policy against, what traffic flows, is paramount. It's fundamental. You can't proceed without understanding what traffic you have. And yet many find a way to do that, successfully or not, should we say.
Piecemeal together by the sounds of it.
Very much.
And do we think it becomes more complex the bigger the environment and the more widespread it becomes? So if people are using sort of on-prem, cloud, hybrid deployments and public and private containerization, do we think that Microseg becomes more complex in that scenario?
Microseg doesn't, but their environment does.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people probably feel like it's getting away from them a little bit. And that can be for various different reasons. But I think that the fundamental thing that we're trying to get across here is we can't take actions if we don't have the right level of context and security. In securities, most people have probably heard of the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. You can't act or decide or even orient yourself. That was very American, wasn't it? Orient. If you don't have the right information. So, what you're mentioning there around context visibility, and it almost links into another really interesting industry term at the moment, which is observability, really, really well. To have a good granular level of observability so that you can decide and act from a security perspective across a really complex environment that may contain on-premise architecture, cloud architecture, multi-cloud architecture, private cloud architecture, function as a service, serverless, containerization. Yeah, it's difficult. I don't think there's a silver bullet to kind of get that to a stage where, I just deploy this one product, bro, and like I can just observe everything. However, microsegmentation lends to a leaner deployment model rather than doing that in a traditional macro segmentation way. And also, if you look at cloud, that's quite hard to deploy traditional firewalls and manage those and monitor those. And also, what context are you getting from those? I think there's definitely a place for them. North-south traffic typically, you would say, is still a good use case for virtual firewalls in cloud, still firewalls on-prem. But that east-west traffic, and you mentioned lateral movement, threat actor's favourite, everyone's favourite. It's a really good way of kind of reducing that, but also getting visibility into stale connections, stale identities, loads of stuff like that.
We do see a lot of flat networks out there still, let's be honest.
Especially cloud.
There's a lot of complexity. We're actually seeing the condensing of a lot of the environments within the estate, where you're then starting to use microsegmentation within that estate to be the control point on every granular device or asset, agentless or agent-based, doesn't matter, rather than having that environmental perimeter-based boundary of a firewall. So we're seeing that collapsing of existing environments becoming flat networks. We're seeing a lot of flat networks out there anyway. And we see that in medical, in manufacturing, in pretty much anything public sector. We see that a lot in terms of flat networks. So the complexity is always going to be there. We're not getting rid of complexity. We're not getting rid of silos. But actually, the microsegmentation can also abstract some of those things and help those teams come to work together quicker. Considering things like M&A as well. You've got M&A activities where you've got the complexity of 2 stacks, not just one, entire sets of silos and stacks on either side. Giving them an opportunity to find a bridge and segment irrespective of the underlying architecture, and give them a safe, comfortable working place between the two to allow traffic to work between the two sides. It's a great way to get those teams working safely and quickly.
And do you think that microsegmentation allows security teams to respond or detect and respond quicker to attacks or breaches that might be occurring or ongoing within their organisation?
Yes, fundamentally. Yeah, I do. Yeah. I mean, look, with a really good, well-engineered, well-deployed, closely monitored and managed firewall, you get similar levels, but how often can we say that? I don't think we can say that often enough, unfortunately. Configuration drift's really real in firewalls, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, fundamentally, you can. I think the biggest thing that stands out to me between the detect and respond stuff there, and I know visibility would actually give you a really, really good sort of chance at detecting quicker and earlier within the kill chain. But the response piece stands out because the way the microsegmentation works and that deployment model and how it's configured and set up means you can respond to on a much more granular level, which lessens business impact, which increases the likelihood of you being able to enact those responses, right? Because typically on network, when we're talking about containment and security operations, you're going to have to contain on a large scale if you're using macro segmentation. So I'm talking whole network segment sometime can be the victim of a containment where 5 assets are potentially infected or have potential threat actor activity going on. With micro segmentation, you can dial that down and be a lot more granular with that. On the detect side, yeah, I do think you can get visibility of things. And I mean, ironically, you should have that visibility before you detect something, ideally. So, those connectivities, those connections, those streams should be limited in the first place, right? So you're also increasing the likelihood of a detection to be a true positive. So yeah, I think it does.
Yeah, and I think I used a term earlier on to underpin existing technologies, and nowhere is that more important, I think, on the likes of EDR, SIEM solutions, and the other detection tool sets. You've got all these things taking in logs, they're taking in events, but actually a lot of those just being bubbled to the surface is potentially as a false positive. You've got too many things to deal with, not always actionable. If we can handle the lower level events, the things that shouldn't be on the network in the first place, there's connections that shouldn't be triggering the events in the alerts in the first place. EDR, IDS, SIEM solutions, where you may be paying for log ingestion or alert ingestion here, there's a cost associated to that. And there's a management aspect for the SOC team to go and do that, like the threat hunting teams as well. If we can reduce the noise, which we do with microsegmentation, the things that do bubble up, they're invalid traffic. That's where those tool sets come into their own, and we can make them more effective, not less. So again, go back to that. It's not rip and replace. It's make them more effective and get more out of what you've already spent the money on. And let's make the teams have some actionable data across the entire estate and not have to dial down the sensitivity, which is what usually occurs, is dialing down the number of events that will be monitored. If I see it, I've got to act on it. It's certainly from a compliance reason. If I have to alert based on that or notify authorities based on that, maybe not everybody's dialing up the sensitivity is quite as high as it could be. We'd like to give them the ability to get back to where it should be, which is dealing with every true positive.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of our partners, and I'm sure that there's a lot of IT resellers and MSPs out there as well that are going through that exact same thing at the moment in terms of alert fatigue, and they're unable to determine actually which alert is a priority and which one can I, or multiple ones can I let the SIEM or the XDR solution to sort of take care of from an artificial intelligence perspective. Because realistically, the more platforms that we introduce and the more technology we use, it becomes very convoluted. So there needs to be a more kind of clearer understanding of, do we use a single platform or do we use multiple platforms to bring all this data in?
I think we're not trying we're not moving up the levels. We're still allowing those technologies to do what they do well. I guess what we're saying is those things not being on the network in the first place, they're not authorized, not allowed, simply helps that process occur.
Yeah, and it's a bit, that visibility is key really, because unless you've got that visibility, you're not going to know if there's a rogue device on the network or something connecting to the infrastructure that's maybe calling out to an unnecessary IP address in a different part of the world that you wouldn't necessarily want somebody connecting to. Do we think that there's a particular vertical that this lends itself to, or and I'm thinking in my head, there's certain verticals that maybe are using legacy operating systems or out-of-date software that creates the vulnerability itself, and can we lend zero trust and microseg to that?
That's a good question. I think microsegmentation, firstly, is applicable to any vertical. There's no vertical it can't work well within. Everybody needs to reduce risk. Everyone needs to look at the traffic they've got within the estate. What I would say is you're right there that certain verticals, take manufacturing, the medical environments, similar things where you've got a lot of legacy. Those environments, quite often the approach is to put a ring fence around those systems at the network boundary and network level. That's great, but if anything does cross that boundary, apart from the monitoring, you might be looking for things to orchestrate protection. You've still got that delay, and you've still got the ability to the impact, I should say, of anything crossing that boundary. Well, those systems are going to end up with an unscheduled disassembly. Right? We don't want to see that. And not everybody wants to apply an agent-based approach to those systems. So I think having that mixed approach of agent for certain environments, we get more granularity, but the network-based approach for this legacy, that works well.
And same to you, Kieron, as well, really.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. You've got a few verticals that jump out, right? And you mentioned a couple of them. So manufacturing, yes, with operational technology, medical, NHS, public sector, with Internet of Medical Things, and all that type of stuff. Yeah, they jump out because effectively exploits one of the biggest attack vectors out there with phishing. In fact, it's bigger than phishing. Because we struggle to monitor assets scope-wise, we struggle to patch and fix those assets in a decent time frame. That's what a lot of these highly regulated industries are obviously going to be subject to regulation. If we look at most of those regulatory certifications, Cyber Essentials Plus being a really good example, they need you to patch in 30 days or fix. And the fix piece is around, well, if you can patch, because clearly an MRI scanner is not something you could just go and patch willy-nilly. Same as a large manufacturing liner for automotive, not something you can just patch willy-nilly. You have to have a degree of technical separation, they call it. And microsegmentation is a really good way of doing that. Traditionally, you would use VLANs and you would put a firewall between those two network segments to restrict that traffic. Microseg is a really good way of doing that. There's quite a lot of sort of links to compliance that you could say, oh, microsegmentation will actually help us out there. It will make us more compliant, or it's easier to comply, or it's easier to evidence, which is also critical when you're part of a governance risk compliance team. PCI DSS is another one. So yeah, verticals jump out. It's really good for compliance. Loads of good stuff, really.
Good. And I guess I hope you both got your crystal balls out as well, because we're, I guess, coming to the end of the session. But it'd be great to understand what you think the future of zero trust or microsegmentation might be, because, you know, it's been around for a long time. You know, we're sort of talking maybe 10-ish years that zero trust has been relevant, really, but it's becoming more prevalent, and, you know, that's why we're here and chatting about things today. But what do you think the future might hold?
So I think the first thing is that, you know, zero trust is at its infancy, albeit it's been around for a while. For many organisations, it really is at the start of their journey here. One of the key aspects here is that it's starting to get a lot more awareness at the board level. We need board level buy-in for zero trust to be effective in any organisation. It's got to be a top-down approach from zero trust. So I think over the next few years, we're going to start to see more and more a business integration into the zero trust approach, if that makes sense. Really looking for the buy-in on, because it's going to touch every silo. All right, so we want to break down those silos. So I think zero trust in itself is going to take some time for most organisations to onboard as a start of their journey. We're going to see more and more technologies move to the explicit approach of defining good policy and what is good, not just for traffic and microsegmentation, but for anything in the estate. You know, it's email or anything else. Moving to other technology sets will encompass zero trust, or the other way around. I think we're going to see microsegmentation specifically. You know, we're seeing a lot more people putting specific line items in their budgets for next year, for the year after as well. Whereas before it was stealing budget from other technology sets. We're no longer at that point. So I think it's in its mainstream, it's in its prime right now. And we'll see more organisations start small with critical assets, critical crown jewels, first and foremost, and expand out to the user community devices as well. So I think we're going to see this as it's not a big bang overnight, but I think it's one of those where the journey starts now, and microsegmentation effectively will help collapse some of the estate. And I think we'll see some of those other devices, like the internal firewalls, start to disappear.
I guess, really, I want to thank you both for coming on and being here today and giving our viewers some thought-provoking content that I'm sure they're going to take away with them, and maybe they'll look at vendors and zero trust and microseg in a different light as well. So I guess, in order to wrap up, Kevin, probably hand the mic over to you, really, and just, do you want to summarise maybe a bit of what we've spoken about today and how it might be beneficial to some of our partners that might be just starting their zero trust journey?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. It's been a fantastic session. What I would say is, microsegmentation is part of the zero trust journey. With or without the zero trust, microsegmentation stands alone. It's the first thing to kind of call out, I guess. But very fundamentally, we're talking about breach containment. We're talking about removing unnecessary traffic. We're talking about controlling the traffic that we do have and that is valid, and saying who can access, not just what can access, but who individually and what roles can access services from inside and outside the network. We're talking about legacy protection. We're gaining visibility across the full estate of hybrid cloud, containers, on-prem, external users, and using that as the context to decide what policy we should be implementing, not just for microsegmentation, but actually to help drive your content management database as well, right? We're talking about the asset management here. So helping to drive policy and awareness of the other technologies around it. It's a great way to get started on that journey with zero trust. When we talk about things like M&A, when we talk about things like the ability to provide zero trust network access integration, it's not just a one-size-fits-all here. It's what do we need to do to help de-risk the business ultimately it's about reducing risk. It's about meeting compliance. It's about giving ourselves a better fighting chance and ultimately saving cost. We've got SOC and other management teams here of the security world that need to be able to do their jobs more proactively and more effectively, where quite frankly they're struggling today. So I think from a partner perspective, there's the ability to help deliver from a customer's zero trust journey, helping them get started on that process. Microseg is a great way to start that process. From a partner perspective, there's a great way to bring new thought leadership to an end user customer. Not everybody's doing microsegmentation today. We'd love to see that in the future, but this is a great way to take that concept and get people started.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.